market movements of that day were actually free market socialists.
In the labor theory of value.
Through the labor theory of value, they developed a libertarian means of socialism. Of course, then you go further out, and then there's developed two different types of socialism. One that sees the state as a way to get for labor to get its profit.
So you actually believe you can assign value by the amount of effort put into something?
There are different theories of
that's
labor
what the labor
value.
theory of value. Yeah.
There's different labor theories of value out there anyway, not just the classic one that Marx uses, which kind of even Carson goes through in this book, which I have, is like, well, it's kind of there, but then again, he's like.
There are two interpretations of Marx. One is a labor theory of value, and the other is an intersubjective theory of value. And there are Marxist economists that are intersubjective theorists of value.
Yeah.
So they grant the subjectivity.
Oh yeah, and even some of the earlier labor value
so what is
theorists.
Intersubjective? Why not just subjective?
Because it's not about what I'm valuing; it's about what we're valuing. It's about a negotiation of a relationship between each other and what we're willing to exchange. So it's not just, I want this more than that. It's a little more complex. It's, you want that more than this, I want this more than this, and so we're now we have an intersubjective.
So they want to put a name on the agreed price and call it an intervalue.
Intervalue, yeah, because it's a negotiation between subjective values.
So in other words, that's the price.
This is essentially saying the same thing, but the Marxian economist is just clarifying. It's not just, because of course the Marxist economist also wants to talk about society and class and culture and community. You know, so they want to go there.
And even some of the earlier economists like Smith and Ricardo, well, maybe not so much as Ricardo, but and Proudhon, they also had a subjective flavor to their labor values of theory anyway. If you recall in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, labor is based on toil and trouble. So toil and trouble is going to be a subjective way to value things. So,
if I can just
go ahead.
Expand on that just a second. So even if you have a labor theory of value necessarily has a subjective component, because labor has necessary disutility associated with it, and utility is about subjective preference. So even if you had, the ones who want to continue labor theory of value, they're even saying like, well, the reason why labor is valuable is because of the disutility, the unsubjectiveness, the I don't like this, I don't want to work, I only want to work 8 hours and I'm tired and I want to quit, and I want to recreate, and I want to relax, and I want to watch TV. Like I don't want to work for 16 hours of every waking hour, so that would be, there's a disutility there.
And so no one can really deny that there is a subjectivity in it. But so one of the biggest problems with the debate between subjective and labor is that it almost misses the point, in that it kind of ignores some of the earlier thoughts on it. And it kind of go because certain labor theorists are either classical Marxists who take that kind of you value everything on labor, and it's kind of like a ratio to that, and that's not a good way to do it, obviously, because it doesn't get any actual prices done. Like you said, you're basically assigning value and not letting people work it out. So it's a pretty neat way to be introduced into socialism, because socialism does have its starts on the market side anyway. Even Proudhon, one of Proudhon's biggest things was synthesis, and when he talks about one of his most famous works is Property is Theft. Well, actually, even through his critical and his constructive era, he goes on to say property is theft, property is possible, property is freedom. And what his big thing is trying to find a synthesis between property and communism, because he sees one side is property going to end up becoming too much control, and everyone's not going to be able to have that piece of land. And communism has that sense of, well, now everyone has forced to share.
The individual is lost.
Yeah, the individual is lost.
Balance that.
And so he's trying to balance ideas of liberty and equality. And that's essential to Proudhon's theories, is that balance. I'm going to mess up this quote, but another big thing about Proudhon is that he wants to basically kind of have you get rid of that absolute in your head.
What absolute?
Well, like if you were like extremely profiteering or extremely communistic, he wants you to resolve the absolute.
Yeah, and Mises said the same thing.
Yeah.
Because Mises said all interactions are social.
Right, exactly. So you're not going to be able to fully develop a theory or a movement or anything if you don't get rid of that absolute in your head. Because if you're going to be absolutist, then you're not going to develop that a good a good social theory or a good economic or anything.
It's all based on the situation, right?
Social relationships.
Social relations.
Negotiating social relationships.
That's very like Heisenberg on certain
Yes.
potential, because it's always, you never really know what the particle is or what it's doing, but it's always like an approximation. And to me, that's like an analogy to going toward equilibrium, which it never reaches, because it changes every nanosecond.
And that, that's fine, because, even I remember this while I was reading, the labor theory of value, how people kind of like, are, well, supply and demand, how you get that, and how does labor get there? Well, it's an approximation going up and down through the valuations. So again, it still echoes Austrian economics in that sense. So,
We're talking about definition of socialism. Could you disambiguate what we would mean for socialism versus what they might mean?
all right.
So you did talk about state socialism.
I did talk about state socialism. So then libertarian socialism is the idea that people can voluntarily get together, whether or not it's going to be market-based or it's going to be cooperative-based without necessarily buying and selling. It's going to be based on communal relationships. It's all voluntary. It's going to be, it's not going to be forced upon people. So that's basically that definition of socialism.
If we're approaching capitalism from this idea of, you've got a capitalist that owns the means of production and other workers work on it, then socialism is an attempt to be an antidote to that. Put the workers, socialism is libertarian socialism is an attempt to be an answer or a solution or a remedy for this capitalism, this problem of capitalism, where you have people working for someone else who historically may have been benefited by the state.
Okay. Did they ever deal with the question of what if they weren't historically benefited by the state?
We can go into that, yeah. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
Because we'd all agree with you on that.
Yeah, well, of course, yes.
I mean,
right.
And it's interesting because there are some miscommunications on the other part. Like, let me talk about socialism.
Socialism,
Socialism is where, for us, libertarian socialism is where the workers control their own means of production. If a plumber works for himself, he owns his own tools, he owns his own van, he is a socialist. He is not a capitalist for us. That's our meaning and understanding of it. It's because he controls him. He doesn't have a boss. He doesn't answer to anyone else. He's his own man. He's independent. He's autonomous. He's an entrepreneur. Like, that's for socialism. If the workers have a workshop and they own it together and they cooperate together and they share in what they're producing, then that's socialism. And whereas some anarcho-capitalists might say, well, no, that's capitalism.
What if they have an unequal share? Is it still socialism or is it capitalism?
That's an excellent question, and I wonder about that too. I don't have a definitive good answer for that. Like, I suppose it is possible for some people to say, I only want to work part-time. Can I have a half share? And I don't see why that'd be a problem.
Or whatever you bid up the price of a
whatever
certain kind of labor.
whatever those people are willing to negotiate is cool. It's a social relationship, not based on force.
So it's still very contractarian in a way.
Yeah.
Well, there is some, like, neo-mutualism is also a little bit contract-based.
Well, yeah, because I would think, like, say you've got 10 people who can chop wood, but one person knows how to measure without felling the tree first. Their skill, he might negotiate for a different benefit.
Right, and,
or not.
even through some of the communistic economics in which, there is that sort of division of labor, basically those arrangements, it's going to be democratically participatory in the workshops. They're all going to have a voice within that. And so they're going to be able to say, yeah, here's what's going on for me, and they're able to split up certain tasks.
Well, is it more democratic or is it more contractual? In other words, suppose, like...
Depending on the socialism that they're more or less...
So basically any kind of voluntary interaction for an economic benefit could be considered
socialist. Yeah. So long as socialism is wherever the producer, the worker, owns his own thing. You know what I mean? He's in control, either by himself or with cooperative with the others. That's socialism, and it's contrasted to capitalism, where the worker is alienated from what he rents himself out under capitalism, and so he doesn't own the product of his own labor. Someone else gets that, and he's compensated with less than that, in return. Whereas in socialism, owning your own means of production, you get the full product of your own labor. It's returned to you. Whatever you produce goes to you and the other workers.
It's funny,
not someone else.
that's exactly the change I went through in the past year. Last year I worked for one of my best friends. I worked for him. And he owned we do lawn mowing. And he owned everything. I just drove his truck and we used his equipment. He paid me a portion of whatever I produced.
Okay.
Well, I quit that.
In a sense, I think what I just heard you say just now, you were like a subcontractor. At least that's kind of like your...
No, I'm more of a subcontractor now.
Okay.
I was an employee then, but
Okay.
you know, I got a paycheck. I got taxes taken out. Well, I quit last year at the worst possible time in the middle of winter, just because I was tired of it.
Yeah.
And I went out on my own. I bought my own equipment, and now I cut my own rules. I get all the money for myself, and I still do sometimes work for him. But now it's like, okay, I have this job. I don't want to do it. Do you want to do it? And I'll be like, yeah. And I get all the money for it.
Yeah. And so like yesterday we were talking about entrepreneurial liberation. Like this is the idea. Is like if you're your own boss, then that's a little bit closer to anarchy. You're now autonomous. You now make decisions for yourself.
So basically, in socialism, if voluntarism comes anywhere near socialism, it becomes anarchist.
Can you say that again in another way?
If there's any voluntary interaction between people in a socialist situation, it's considered like libertarian socialism, right?
If 4 anarcho-capitalists get together and form their own business where they're like 4 equal partners, that's socialism for me. You know, it doesn't become capitalism until they start employing people who don't get a share. They are divorced from the product of their labor.
What if one person has half of it and the other 3 each have a sixth?
Again, like I wonder about that. I haven't read a lot of good stuff about that. I think that could still be socialism if it's all voluntary. If if everyone's that's just the agreement they want to do.
And how is that different than being paid a reduced wage?
Paid a reduced wage.
If I have a lesser share,
so
then
like,
I'm getting a wage less than my labor.
Basically,
You're getting whatever your labor was. You know, so if I want to work if I want to be an unequal partner with someone, like I want you to do more work than me. Like, are you willing to do more work? You can get double the share. I'm willing to we can negotiate that out. And like now we both get the full product of our labor. And if I feel like his double share is not equivalent to what I'm putting in, I either reduce my labor and work somewhere else, or I just like, it's not working out, I'm going to go somewhere else.
Okay, so you can still refuse and exchange.
Yeah, it's all about whatever you can negotiate socially.
And I would also.
So what if the guy who's got 50% says, I can't do my whole 50% of the work, I want to hire these 2 people because it's worth more to me than I can pay them. It's still
then it's gone from
something that's
socialism
worked
to
out.
something else.
It's worked out socially. It's
Why isn't
worked
that
out
socialism?
socially. How is that not?
Well, it depends because if the workers themselves can also have their say in the contract, it's not just going to be you making the contract. It's them also making the contract with you.
Well, they have to agree to the
Okay, now
contract.
we're talking about this is where it gets murky for me too. Is
But
that
in
the
a-
idea of a subcontractor?
In a situation where you're able to keep the full product of your value, the whole full product, why would you choose to work for less than your full product?
If you're a
It
subcontractor,
wouldn't make logical
Those
sense.
people, if you found people who were willing to,
They're
it would be
saps.
wrong to do so.
Yeah, but there's a lot of saps in the world.
Exactly, there's a lot of saps out there.
And
Why not?
Well,
to help out those
sometimes
saps,
that also comes with less responsibility, and people don't want all the responsibility.
Exactly.
Or risk. There's a risk involved too, and they don't want to take the risk.
I'm a little overwhelmed. Somebody want to just say, okay, me now?
Apprenticeship. I do build brick patios.
You build brick patios.
I'm building a brick patio right now. I got a couple of high school kids. I got this other guy that works for me. I got all the equipment.
Yeah.
I've got years of experience. I know what I'm doing. I found the customer. I did it. And sometimes they're a big help, and sometimes they're not. It's a lot simpler for me to just pay them by the hour. Now, if I was to say, well, you really helped me out on this one, I'll give you 50%. And then sometimes I had a hard time with the job, and I think I'm going to give you profit share and give you like $4 an hour for this job because I just lost my ass.
Right, yeah. So if I hear what you're saying like,
I don't think
I'm an entrepreneur. I worked hard. I built up lots of stuff, and now I have this business. And now that I grew that business, I need to hire employees to continue to grow it, and I wouldn't want to give those employees like a full equal share with me because they haven't put in that labor and they may not be worth it to me. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and they don't have to take on the risk. And
They don't take on the risk.
Reputation.
I think your ideal is capitalism because you can do whatever the hell you want, and you don't have to work for this person. If this kid doesn't like it, he can go start his own thing or do that. And I don't think.
What about bringing new
Well, let him answer.
Yeah,
that.
God, I
Let
want to
him
get to
answer.
this.
Let him answer.
Sidetrack, you know. Okay.
Yeah, before.
Do you have like a big response? I thought I was one, but I'm talking
No,
about.
you can go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So there's like a tension that did the people, are the employees, do they have a choice? Did they choose the state? Did they choose capitalism? Was this a voluntary thing on their part? Or was that kind of forced on them by the states? Like the current economic situation, whatever it is, if you want to call the current economic situation capitalism. I know some people don't want to say that. But most people would say, well, we do have something, it's capitalistic right now. It may not be pure, true Scotsman capitalism. But, well, yeah, that's the true Scotsman fallacy. Like, you can just say it's not pure enough, so it's not it, and so it's something else. And so, yeah, I refuted your criticism of the thing that I'm talking about, like, real history, real life, you know. So real employees are probably disenfranchised people. Most people who here works for a wage? You know what I mean? Like,
I did.
you know, if you're working for a wage, it's probably not because you're like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to work for a wage. You're probably working for a wage because you're like, well, the government would prevent me from starting my own business. And starting my own business would be really hard because the government and the people who have their own business are the ones who know how to work the system and work around the state and a lot of times get benefited by the state. And for the most part, what we're not talking about, like, there's a thing called a petty bourgeoisie. So, like, that's really, like, I'm not too concerned about the petty bourgeoisie. I'm not concerned about the small business owner who has a few employees. I think as soon as you get rid of the state, like, that just goes away. You know what I mean? Like, because those employees can now start their own businesses, and they can become independent. They can join worker cooperatives. And so, like, labor becomes much more expensive. So it's almost like, you know, to keep your labor costs down, you need to join with other people who are willing to labor with you. I'm going on a tangent, but I wanted to address what you're talking about.
I'm just saying, as an anarcho-capitalist, I have no problem with you doing whatever you want to do. And if you don't want to work for me and you want to work in a cooperative, then that's all fine and dandy.
And you're dealing with the current economics. You are dealing with the current economic system as it exists. And you know, you're not trying to exploit these people, but you're saying, like, I could offer you a job. Maybe there's some mutually accessible. This is what's happening. And what I'm saying is, like, if we get rid of the states, then probably some of that goes away. Like, the labor without the state, laborers are much more empowered to join cooperatively. It's much harder to accumulate capital by using political privilege to amass capital and become a giant corporation. Like, that's harder to do in a stateless society. A wage labor the relationship of an employer-employee is going to start to dissolve.
Well, I think everyone here would agree that
Yeah,
crony capitalism
and that's
sucks.
Yeah, today's capitalism, this is
crony,
capitalism,
crony.
it sucks.
It's crony.
This is